a bit impractical. So the Vajrayana is very much about how we practice in everyday life, but in a very mythic and magical way. And we're talking, and what I'm going to talk about today about Padmasambhava comes from Padmasambhava. There is a person called Padmasambhava, and he is coming in about 3 weeks, so you can meet him, and he's quite magical, and you can make up your own mind about him as well. But today we're talking about Padmasambhava, and we're talking about what's written in this amazing text, which is the life and liberation of Padmasambhava, which was written by one of his disciples, a woman called Yeti Tsogyal. And it is an amazing, it's just full of such strange things, very strange things. I think it's one of those great, actually, it's a kind of a great piece of literature in its own right. So, yes, this is where these stories come from. And last week we heard from Dharma Mai about Padmasambhava. In particular, we heard about how he was asked to come to Tibet and to help convert the people of Tibet to Buddhism. The king invited him. And what had happened is the king had invited one of the most famous teachers of the time, an abbot, a very lovely man called Satyajyoti. And he'd been asked to come, and he'd come, and they said, let's build a monastery. So they set about building a huge monastery that was also going to be like a training place for people to train in the Dharma. But they built the monastery during the day, and during the night it got taken down. It got taken down by the Nagas, the genies, as they're called in the book, actually, the genies, the gods, the kind of, the mythical figures of Tibet were destroying the monastery just as fast as people could build it. So it could be seen in a way as that the unconscious side, the dark unconscious side of Tibet was destroying any attempts that were made to have a kind of positive and Buddhist life going on there. So what they thought they needed to do was call in Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava because he was one of the most, another famous Buddhist of the time, but a very different type of person. He was a magician. He was a dangerous character. He spent a lot of his time in the cremation grounds, meditating. Several times, people disliked him so much that they tried to set fire to him. So he wasn't always popular with people. He was quite dangerous. So they called in Padmasambhava, and Padmasambhava is an interesting figure because he was both a real historical figure. There really was someone called Padmasambhava who really did go to Tibet with a real king, but he's also a very mythical figure, and it's very much him as a mythical figure, as a magical figure I'm going to talk about today. So here we have a picture of Padmasambhava, and things to notice about him are that he is holding a staff. And on the staff, there are 3 heads in various different stages of decomposition. So there's a skull, there's a head that's kind of half rotten, and there's a head that's quite newly cut off somebody. So on this staff with these 3 heads, that's very much representing impermanence. He's also carrying a skull cap, and the skull cap very much looks like it's filled with blood, red blood. And that's representing shunyata, or emptiness. So he is a dangerous, a magical, a mythical figure. And Dharma Mai told us last week how when he first went to Tibet, the first thing that he did actually was that he did what he could to transform and tame the demons of Tibet. So these demons, these nagas that were digging up the monastery foundations in the middle of the night, he transformed them. And he spent about 18 months doing that, actually. He didn't go to see the king who'd called him straight away. And the way that he did it, as Dharma Mai told us last week, was basically to each naga that he met, he would first of all use the power to subdue them. So his power. Then he would give them their secret name, or he would know their secret name. And then he would give them a treasure to look after, to guard. So that is how he transformed the energies of the demons. And after he'd been doing that for around about 18 months, he decided he would go and see the king. And that's where my story for today picks up. And actually, whilst he'd been traveling all around Tibet, transforming, meeting these demons and these nagas, the king would send some messengers saying, I'm a very powerful king, will you please come? I've sent for you all the way from India. He'd come from India. But Padmasambhava would always say, no, I need to do a bit more here, I need to do a bit more here, and I will come in my own time. So if we come to the time when they actually met, when Padmasambhava felt he was able to go and meet the king. So we have the king, and the king is quite an interesting figure in himself. So the king is called Trisong Detsen, and at his birth, an astrologer predicted that he was going to be someone really special. And for instance, his mother didn't have any morning sickness at all. So that was a sign that he was going to be someone really special. And the astrologer predicted that he was going to look a particular way. He was going to be a very handsome man. He would have a dark red mouth, the seal of regal thought on his visage. So we had a little discussion in the team meeting about how you say visage, because I'm not quite sure whether it's visage or visage or anyway. So he had the seal of regal thought on his face, I could say. His teeth were the colour of snow in seemly ranks. He had azure hair curling to the right on his head. He'll be perfectly beautiful like the son of a god, and he will build the bridge of Dharma between India and Tibet. So he was quite a special character, the king, and he was actually proclaimed king when he was about 15. And within 7 years, so I think when he took the throne, Tibet was a very dangerous place. There were bands of brigands and thieves roaming around. But within 7 years, he turned the brigands into military leaders. So he'd got the brigands on his side. And he'd got married. He had 2 wives. He got married. And then at 17, he started to think about the Dharma. And he realized that there had been Dharma in Tibet before, but it had died out. And that he wanted the Dharma to be practiced again. So first of all, he sent for Shantarakshita, who was known as the Bodhisattva, the abbot, the one that was too gentle to tame the demons. And then when that didn't work, he sent messengers with a lot of money and gold to ask Padmasambhava to come. And as I've said, Padmasambhava took his time, but in time he came. So once he destroyed or subdued or transformed these destructive unconscious energies in Tibet, he made his way to meet the king. And they met on a riverbank on a very hot day indeed. It says the heat was oppressive and there was neither water or tea to be had. But what Padmasambhava was able to do was he managed to hit a spring with a staff and water came gushing out of that. So that was part of that story. And the king had sent his noblemen, 500 iron-clad horsemen, to meet the king, whilst the king stayed in a pleasure park where there was a double castle. So a very impressive, very wealthy place. And he had with him his 2 queens and all their ladies, the courtiers. It was a very big occasion, full of, everyone was dressed in their finery. Everybody was there who was anybody. And it says, the king of Tibet stood forth in the midst of his court. One might have thought it the quivering radiance of a brood of pigeons. So, the quivering radiance of a brood of pigeons. So, and he was welcomed for Padmasambhava. There were dancers with drums, dancers with songs, dancers with masks, and harmonious dances. There was the ladies in all their dazzling attire. So, after some time, Padmasambhava comes into this amazing gathering of people, the court of Tibet, all the important people of Tibet, and I imagine all the unimportant people as well have all come to see the arrival of Padmasambhava. And the king makes a little bow of welcome to Padmasambhava. But then there's a silence. Nothing happens. Padmasambhava doesn't bow back. He just stands there. And Padmasambhava thinks, the king of defiled Tibet is great, but who are we, he and I? Plunged in darkness is his mind. I am learned in the 5 realms of knowledge, Buddha in a single lifetime, exempt from birth and death. The Buddha bowed down before me. Shall I or shall I not return his bow? If yes, the majesty of the doctrine will be slighted. If no, Since he is the king, he will be angered. Yet however great he be, bow down I cannot. And so they're both of them still standing there in this very awkward, tense silence. The king Trisong Detsen thought to himself, I am sovereign over all the blackheads of Tibet. The guru must prostrate himself. So loath to extend the first greeting, he stood there hesitant. So it's a very hot day, all the court is there. There's a silence. Padmasambhava is not going to bow. The king wants him to bow. He's got his 500 ironclad horsemen. It could be quite a difficult moment, perhaps. So what does Padmasambhava do? Well, he starts to sing. He sings a song. And there are 30 verses of the song, and I'm not going to sing them, but I'll just recite a few of them. So one of the things he says is, I am Padmasambhava, the holy doctrine. Mine are the counsellings for assured ascension in the Dharma. Externally, I am a saffron-robed bhikshu. A bhikshu is a monk or a wanderer. Within, I am yogi of supreme secret mantras. I am Padmasambhava, the sorcerer. Mine are the counselling of the Dharma that transmutes the 5 poisons. I do not bid farewell to pleasures. I take them with me on the path. I exult in the 5-fold gnosis. I am Padmasambhava, the old woman. Mine are the counsellings of the doctrine that gently guides old women. I gird about me the armour of 3-fold patience. I vanquish inimical misery and error. I am Padmasambhava, the youth. Mine are the counsellings of both the relative and absolute meaning of the doctrine. I storm the fortress of the 3-fold ecstasy. In places of every kind, I like to play. So there are many other verses in which Padmasambhava describes himself as being, I am Padmasambhava the king, I am Padmasambhava the hero, Padmasambhava the child, the minister, the abbot, many different kind of roles in life that he describes himself as. And when I read it, it reminded me of a quote from Walt Whitman where he says, I am large, I contain multitudes. So there's a sense of Padmasambhava is large. He is all these different ways of being in the world. And I think it's the other way around as well. We contain multitudes as well. We contain multitudes. So we are the king. So in the story that I'm describing, we have within us the king, we have the queens, we have the ironclad horsemen, we have all those beings that are there, and we are Padmasambhava too. We have Padmasambhava within us as well. Because I think Padmasambhava could be said to be a principle in the world, the principle of enlightenment in the world. Interestingly, Padmasambhava in this story is described as not being born of a human. He's born of Amitabha, Amitabha, the great red Buddha of compassion. He's an emanation of Amitabha, born on a lotus in a lake. He appears as a young child on a lotus in a lake. So he can be seen as something quite magical, this, the embodiment, I suppose, of this principle of enlightenment. So what is this principle of enlightenment? So it's the principle of freedom from confusion, from grasping, from pushing away. So the freedom from hatred, delusion, craving. It's the principle of compassion and wisdom, the compassion and wisdom that comes from a deep seeing of reality. So it comes from seeing we're all interconnected. We've got no inherent or fixed selfhood. So it's the Bodhisattva's wisdom of seeing that there are no beings, but of having compassion for all beings. That's the wisdom, that's the principle that Padmasambhava has. So he's got the knowledge of where our suffering comes from, where it really comes from, and how we can understand where our suffering comes from, and then how we can act so that that suffering will gradually fade away from us. So here we are. If we go back to this situation by the river where we've got the king, we've got Padmasambhava, and in a way we could use this story to explore the idea of going for refuge. So you might have heard people talk about going for refuge quite a lot, and sometimes it can feel quite confusing. I think, what does going for refuge really mean? And I think this story can, for me, really helps to explain it. Because I think the king could be said to represent going towards false refuges, and Padmasambhava, the true refuges. And I suppose we could ask ourselves, what do we bow to? Padmasambhava won't bow to the king. What would we bow to? What do we go for refuge to? So let's start with the king. The king. So I think the great thing about the king is, of course, if it wasn't for the king, Padmasambhava wouldn't even be there. Okay, because it's the king that has invited Padmasambhava to come to his kingdom. So it's interesting, if we see this king as being part of ourselves, our inner king, it's actually a side of us that looks after ourselves pretty well. It's a side that could be described as being a happy, healthy human being. But it's a side that needs more than that. It's more than just being a happy human being. He's obviously very good at being king. He's a handsome man. He's got, all these wonderful horsemen. He's managed to make his kingdom a very positive kingdom. He's got lots of wealth. He's got good relationships. So he's a very successful king. He's very good at being a king. But yet he wants more. He's called for the Dharma to come to his country. He wants something more. Because I think even if we are able to be lucky enough to have a very positive life, it's not enough for most human beings. Because there are different types of suffering. There's traditionally seen as different types of suffering. So the first kind is the suffering that probably all of us have experienced at some time in our life. Just the deep suffering of mental illness, grief, loss, bereavement, illness, pain. The kind of suffering where it's just really easy to feel, I just want this to stop. I really want this to stop. And for some of us at times, that can be like something that will encourage us to practice. At those times, we might find ourselves practicing more because that suffering is so extreme, so strong, that we want to do what we can to stop it, that kind of suffering. But even if we're luckier than that at the moment, at this point in our lives, and we're having, things are going positively for us, perhaps we might have good relationships, lots of material things are going really well, we know that won't last. We know that won't last. We know that, people die, things break. It happens all the time, doesn't it? It's just like in small ways and big ways. I did a thing today where it's like where I live, where my car was, I had to reverse it out kind of around all these corners. And I've always thought I couldn't do it. And today I was like, yes, I'm going to reverse my car. And I did really well. It was like I didn't hit the fence. I didn't hit Sangagita's car. So like all the things that were in the way. I didn't hit these concrete kind of posts that I've hit in the past. It was just fantastic. But then what did I do? When I got outside, I forgot there was a big hole in the road that had been dug there. And I drove my car into it and damaged the front of it. And it was just like, there you go. It's just like, however hard we try, in such a mundane way as that, the car, breaks. So, I mean, I know that's just like a really small way, compared to some of, but it just shows that whatever our experience of life, there will be types of suffering. So we've got this, this awareness that even if we're on a really fantastic holiday and things are going really well for us, it will come to an end. Whatever's happening for us, we will get old, we will get ill. Things, even if they're going well for us, they change. And then there's another kind of suffering, which you could almost call existential suffering. So even if things are going really well for us and we're aware that they're going to change, as long as we identify ourselves as being separate from the rest of the flow of conditions, we are going to feel an existential loneliness. And someone called Subhuti, who's one of the kind of sort of senior teachers in Triratna, he's got a lovely image for this, which is that, in a way, we could see ourselves as being like caged lions. So we're human beings with immense potential to grow and develop. But we're beautiful creatures, but we're put in a cage. And in that cage, where we're not free, we just pace up and down in this very limited room where we are. And you can imagine, lions and lionesses are so beautiful, aren't they? With their muscles rippling and their beautiful fur, the mane of the lion, and it all starts to go a bit mangy, you know, when they're behind bars. This whole power of the lion starts to get lost. So it's a bit like, because we don't realize the reality of things, that we are part of this interconnectedness, that there is change all the time, we put ourselves in a cage. We put ourselves in a cage of separateness. And in that cage, just like those lions, we start to lose our power as well. So there's the king. So I'm imagining the king actually as a person who knows, he will know his own suffering. He knows the suffering that he might lose being king. You know, if you're like a king, people will try and kill you to stop you from being king. And he will also know that existential suffering, the existential suffering of being a human being. And so what does he go? So when we suffer, when things are difficult for us, well, we want to look for a safe haven. We want to look for somewhere we can go, which we call going for refuge. It's going for refuge, looking for some kind of security in life, a completely natural thing to do, that we want security. So the king has brought with him to this meeting quite a few different types of security that he has. So he's got his lovely queens with him, his two beautiful queens. And I think it's important to say that as far as I know, women could also have two husbands. So it's not some kind of thing. It's like, as far as I know, today in Nepal, for instance, women can have two husbands or more if they want. So it's like he's got two queens. And relationships, I think, for us in the West can be something we really do make into a false refuge. We try, what by false refuges? We try and look for something they can't give us. So in our relationship, particularly our romantic sexual relationship, we sometimes want that person to be everything. So we want them to be our lover and our best friend and maybe our co-parent and the person that we kind of go on holiday with and the person we talk to every day and we live with and our companion and the person we do the gardening with. Just like, you know, we just like want everything from this person. We want them to be a bit like our parent, our mother or our father. We want them to be like our brother or sister. We look for everything in this person. And I think that's quite a recent Western thing. I don't think people have always done that with the person that they get married to, but it's something that we really try and do. And of course, well, as we all know, that's not going to work. No one person can be that to anybody else. But yet it's so strong, isn't it? It's like I still have it in me quite strongly. If only I meet that right person, then I'll live happily ever after. But doesn't seem to be true, And I think people who have been in like long and successful relationships will know that they only work because they let go, actually, of that neurotic craving that the other person will fulfill every single need for them. And in fact, it becomes less about that person fulfilling their need and more about giving to that person, more about loving that person rather than being loved by that person. So there's kind of a way that, moving away from this neurotic idea of relationships. So that's something we definitely, I certainly have gone for refuge to, is relationships. But of course, what happens in relationships? Well, people change. People change, and they might not change in the way that you want them to. Or I changed in my relationship, and it maybe wasn't in the way that the person I was in a relationship wanted me to change. It's like we change, you know. And more than that, people die as well. So even if you've had an amazing marriage and you've lived to be like 90 together, probably one of you will die first. So it's a bit like, you know, whatever happens, actually we can't go for refuge to our relationships. So that's one thing that the king had brought with him. He brought his relationships. Another is, in a way, he's brought his kingliness with him. He'd brought all these kind of men in wearing their iron horse, whatever it was, these ironclad horsemen he'd brought with him. He'd brought all his status with him. And I suppose for many of us, we look to our work, our career. We go for refuge in ways to our work and our career because we look for meaning there, and we look for status, and we look for a kind of reason, not exactly to exist, but a kind of, well, that's what I do. That's what I do with my life, is my work. And that can be really good. You know, many of us in this room will be doing really good things in our work, but it won't last. It's not a refuge we can count on, because, you know, people start sending around those emails, you know, that are saying, we're going to look for a few people to be leaving in a month or two. The kind of people are made redundant, companies close, the public sector gets cut. There's all sorts of things that mean that we might not have our jobs anymore. In fact, our jobs change as well, as we do them, they change. And we may have felt that we were indispensable. We may have worked really, really hard and maybe made ourselves suffer by working really hard in our jobs. But then when the time comes for us to retire or for the service to be revamped, people will get rid of us. We are not indispensable. So there's something about going for refuge to our work, to our career, will not work in the long run. A third thing that the king brings with him is his material possessions. So everybody's wearing these beautiful clothes. There's a real sense of that the king is rich. And of course, that's very strong in our society, isn't it? If only I had enough money, everything would be all right. The problem is, whenever I've done that kind of test on myself, like how much would be enough, it's amazing how it keeps going up. It's like I'll go, well, if I had X amount, if I earned £50,000 a year, then I'd be really happy. And then I think, oh, well, maybe 75 would be quite good, and it's just like, it just keeps going up and up and up. And we can really see that with people who are very wealthy. It's like, there may be people who are really wealthy who just kind of go, that's fine, I'm stopping. But many people who are really wealthy, they want more money and more money than they could ever spend. It's something about it's never enough. And I think for me, having some money in the bank is associated with security. So there's a sense that if I have a pension, if I've got some savings, whatever life throws at me in the future, I'll be secure. And there is some truth in that, isn't there? There is some truth that we do need to think about the future. We do need to plan our future, and a little bit of money can really be helpful. But if we think that our pensions and our savings are secure, we might be wrong. There have been lots of financial upheavals in the world. There's been lots of situations in the world where people thought they lived in very safe conditions like we think we do in Britain, and then things went badly wrong. There was a war in that country. I imagine there were many Syrians who thought they were living very happy lives, and then there was a war in their country, and now they find themselves refugees without anything. It can happen. We might feel like it doesn't. I do in some extent feel like it won't happen to me, but it could happen to me. There's no reason why it couldn't. So although I'm not saying that, I'm not saying we should give away all our money. I am saying that if we go to that for our sense of security, we go for refuge to having money, it might not work out for us in the long run. It might not be a true refuge. And the other thing he brings with him is entertainment. So he brings the drums. I talked about the drums and the harmonious dancers and the drums. I thought that was really interesting, actually, because in a way, I think us as humans probably have more entertainment on hand than we have any beings ever had in the history of the world, I'd have thought, unless maybe they were kings. But it's a bit like we have so much, and we have all got little devices, and at the end of that device there is films, books, TV series, whatever. There's a huge amount of entertainment. And, when do we turn to that entertainment? Quite often we turn to it when we're feeling dissatisfied, when we're actually feeling that dukkha, the existential dukkha. What do we do to get rid of it? We turn to the entertainment. And I thought it was really interesting last week when Dharma Mayu talked about Netflix, her Netflix addiction. And it's not surprising, because I think what happens when I occasionally watch those kind of like those series, those box sets, and it's a bit like I'm so immersed in one story, aren't I? It's great. I'm not thinking about myself at all. Really great, really immersed. If I turn it off, I'm going to feel dissatisfaction, even if it's for a little bit, and then I have to go to bed or something. It's like, no, I don't want to feel that dissatisfaction. And Netflix allows me to just go straight into the next one, and it's just like I can just go from one to the other. And actually, I think it almost should be made illegal. Well, I don't know, but I don't know if it should be made illegal, but it is. In the way that some very addictive drugs are illegal, it feels to me that it's working in a very similar way. Anyway. Luckily, I don't have an internet connection in my room, actually, which saves me from a lot of this. So those are some of the things that might be false refuges, and there are many other false refuges that we might go to. I was thinking the king might go to he might be very proud about being a king. There's all sorts of things that we might go to. And in a way, it's not those things themselves. It's not the entertainment or the material possessions or the relationship that's the problem. It's our attitude to them. Because it's interesting that we Westerners have so much, don't we? We have so much. And you'd think we'd be really happy. I suspect that people who are much poorer than us in other countries, if they knew what we had, would think, well, they must just be really happy all the time, you know. But yet we're not. Instead, we have these epidemics of depression and anxiety. So there is something going on there about, even though there is so much, our attitude seems to mean that we suffer. And this suffering partly comes from, I think, fear. It comes from fear. So it's it's terrifying that we are tiny, fragile, vulnerable, impermanent beings separate from the world. It's like here we are, we're all very tiny, all very vulnerable. We all know that we're going to die, we know it in some way. And that's terrifying. That's terrifying. No wonder we look for other refuges to escape from that reality. So there's the king. There are some of his refuges and some of ours. So let's look now at Padmasambhava. So Padmasambhava, our inner Padmasambhava even. So Padmasambhava represents the traditional three jewels. He gives us the three jewels, the three refuges. So the first of all is that he's sometimes called the second Buddha. So he himself is an enlightened being, a Buddha in one lifetime. And I think in his image, I think you get a sense of his beauty, his wildness, his magic. And why is he wild? Why? Because he's free of fear. He's fearless. And he's able to directly bring to mind impermanence and death. He's holding that the staff. And he also holds the skull cup as well. He's able to link to the fact that we will all die. And he's fearless, yeah. So another thing about him, of course, is he is representing the Dharma. And I think the teachings of the Dharma he particularly is representing his impermanence, as I've just said, with the heads. And also something about him, I think he's so free, so wild, because he's not looking for safety. He knows there is no safety in the world. He's given up all hopes and fears of safety. And then he's part of the Sangha, isn't he? He is, when we talk about the Sangha in terms of the three jewels, the three refuges, it's important to say we're talking about the enlightened Sangha. We're not talking about us lot here, lovely though we are. We will, by the nature of us being, unenlightened, probably let people down fairly often, sadly. But, we are talking about the enlightened Sangha, the Arya or noble Sangha. So I think there's lots we could talk about in these three refuges, and maybe it's something you could talk about in your groups. Does it work for you, this idea of going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha? How do they represent for you if they do true refuges? What are your false refuges, perhaps? Okay, so from this talk, I think there are 5 points. There's loads I could pull out, I think. I think it's an amazingly powerful story, but I'm going to mention 5 points. So the first is, Padmasambhava's staff, Padmasambhava. So he's holding impermanence. He's really coming to face the impermanence of all beings that are born will die. And in a way, what he stands on, there's a phrase about the only thing you can stand on is groundlessness. So we want ground, don't we? We want there to be something which is solid. In a way, what is solid is the fact that nothing is solid. So the more that we can know and not expect anything to be solid, the more we will have that place of groundlessness that we can just be happy. Like he is, he's just, there are pictures, aren't there, where he's floating in the air. He's not looking for any security. The second, I think, from him is this magicalness. It's that we can't fix samsara. So I think what we can often do with our practice is, so samsara is often put against nirvana as 2 different things. Nirvana is enlightenment. Samsara is life where we're not enlightened. But it's really important that, samsara and nirvana are not places. Samsara and nirvana are ways of being in the world. So they're verbs. It's a bit like we are creating a samsara in the way that we are being in the world. And what we can try and do with our practice, maybe as we get a bit happier and we have more friends and things are looking good, is we think, gosh, if only I do it right, I can make this way of living okay. So I can actually just carry on living as I am doing now, but I'm going to do everything right. I'll meditate loads, and then I'll be in a really good mental state, and I'll be really mindful, so I'll be really careful, and actually I'll be able to live on my own terms, as it were, and everything will be fine. So, but we can't fix samsara, because in the end, it's not fixable. All we can do is we can try and live in a different way. So following on from that, it's something about not letting ourselves make the Dharma mundane. So in a way, we're going to want to do that all the time. We kind of hear a piece of Dharma and we think, that's fantastic. I can really use that in my life, in my work. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So an example would be secular mindfulness, which I think has done probably many tens of hundreds of thousands of people a lot of good. So there's nothing inherently wrong with secular mindfulness. The issue is if that's all it is presented as. Because if we're just using mindfulness to try and make our life as it is better, that's fine. But it's not what the Dharma's about. It's not what Padmasambhava is about. He's a magician. He's magical. He's powerful. Because what happens is the more that we can use the Dharma to make our sense of self more fixed, more strong, which we can do, actually we're going to have more unhappiness in the long run. The whole point of the Dharma is to blow through that sense of fixed self, to blow through the fact that we have an identity. So we can use the Dharma to make ourselves feel, well, I'm a really great person, I'm really good at this, but if we identify with that, I'm such a good meditator and I'm such a great person and I'm really kind, if we identify with that, then we're just going to line ourselves up for suffering in the end, because that's another identity. And the Dharma is about blowing that apart, realizing that we are part of the flow of conditions of the world. Yeah. So it's a bit like, we talked about the lion in the cage. We need to be blowing apart those bars, not trying to make our lion, give it really nice food and brush its mane and make it really comfortable. We're trying to set it free. Okay, so the next thing that occurs to me, I think, is that from Padmasambhava and this story, is that we need to hold it all in love and compassion. Love and compassion. Padmasambhava is born of the lotus. He's from the family of Amitabha. This is the family to do with love and compassion. And although he is, he's very magical, he's very dangerous, he comes from a place of love. And if we are going to be looking at trying to blow the sense of ourselves apart, we need to do that from a place of metta, not a place of self-hatred. So the lotus is really important. And the last thing I want to say is we're much stronger than we know. I think Padmasambhava really gives that. We've got Padmasambhava inside us. Just as we've got demons inside us, we've also got Padmasambhava inside us. And we contain these powerful and magical forces, and we can grow and develop them. So before I just finish, I'll just say a little bit about what the end of the story, because I haven't said the end of the story, have I? So what happens at the end is, so we left it, Padmasambhava sung that song, and everyone's waiting to see what happens. And I think everyone just looks at him like this, and then Padmasambhava sends flames out of the ends of his fingers across all the gathered people, and they all drop to the floor. They all bow to him, not surprisingly. So they all bow to him, and the king apologizes. So the king says, I'm really sorry, what can I do to make it better? And Padmasambhava says, build 5 stupas. So that's another story that someone else could tell another time. So it's a bit like, so the end of the story is that, the king realizes that actually he himself has called in Padmasambhava to do something, and that he looks up to Padmasambhava. He's able to bow to Padmasambhava. And we could say that to ourselves in a way. It's a bit like, so we've all come here. It's a bit like our inner king has brought us to the Dharma, but we're inviting the Dharma in. We're inviting Padmasambhava in. And so we need to be able to, if we want to bow to something that is bigger than us, to the powers in the world that are bigger than us. We need to be able to sing a Padmasambhava song ourselves. So you remember I read those verses that were like, I, Padmasambhava, am the king. I, Padmasambhava, am the sorcerer. And it's interesting because when I heard those I am Padmasambhava repeated quite a few times, it reminded me of the film and the story where people go, I am Spartacus. Does everybody know that? And I think in a way, thank you. Because actually, so what happens for people who don't know the story is that there's like a number of slaves have been taken by the Romans. And I think they're in a rowing boat. And for a reason I can't remember, the Romans want Spartacus. And if they get him, they'll kill him. So he's with all these other slaves. And the nasty Roman comes in and goes, so who's Spartacus? And Spartacus, I think he might say something like, I'm going to kill you all unless, one of you identifies himself as Spartacus. So Spartacus, of course, puts his hand up and says, I'm Spartacus. But then another slave stands up and says, I'm Spartacus. And after a while, one after another, they all stand up and they all say, I'm Spartacus. Which I think is really beautiful in many ways, actually. And in a way, they are saying, I am Padmasambhava, because it's that same principle in action, isn't it? It's a principle of courage, of compassion, and it's also an expression, I think, of a wisdom of interconnectedness, because in some sense, they are all Spartacus. They are all Spartacus. So, yes. So, we can all say in that way, I am Padmasambhava. So I've written myself a little verse for me. So, here's my verse. So, I am Padmasambhava, the middle-aged woman. I was given the gift of the secret name, Light of Truth. I bask in the light and love of Amitabha. My joy is in the truth of the Dharma. That's my verse for me. My name, Satyajyoti, means light of truth. So that's why it's my secret name. But here you all are as well, because you are all Padmasambhava as well. You are all emanations. You all have within you the powers of Padmasambhava to transform, to grow, to be free. Each of you is a caged lion who could be set free. So you could ask yourself, what would your life be like if you allowed the principle of Padmasambhava to grow more in you? If you allowed yourself to be free, a free lion, what would you be like? Sometimes I think we're more scared of the power within us than we are of our failings, I suppose. So I'm going to finish with a reading that some of you might know from someone called Marianne Williamson, which was apparently Nelson Mandela quoted it, but she wrote it. And she uses the word God in it, which actually I'm not that bothered about, but I've changed it to mystery, in case people are bothered by that. So let's just finish with that. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of the mystery. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.